Welcome back to our amazing Leaders on the Mic podcast. And this 2 days have been really joyful. We are at Velocity, which is a conference, a first-time conference in Los Angeles, full of resource allocators, CEOs, C-suite people, geniuses behind brands like our guest today. I'm really excited about introducing her. But as you know, this podcast has everything to do with being a leader. But more importantly, and even more filtered, it has everything to do with being a leader on the mic. To be invited here, you need to have a voice. You need to have the courage to actually speak up and use your power to create a difference. And our guest today has been doing it for years in a very successful way. She's transformed her company into a company that actually knows where the growth is coming from and acts on it. So help me welcome Jessica, and then I'll let you introduce yourself. Mm-hmm. But Jessica and I just participated in a panel here in this conference, and it was, I would say, we got so many compliments about it. Yeah. And Jessica was the star, I have to say. She showed us what she's done, and I can't wait for her to share it with our audience today. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And could you introduce yourself in your own words?
Absolutely. Thank you, Anna. I'm so honored to be on your podcast, and my first. And my name is Jessica Byrd, and I represent IKEA. I'm the multicultural marketing manager, and thrilled to be here to speak about the importance of our Hispanic segments and consumers in the U.S. and the fact that our Hispanic audience is a growth segment in the U.S., which, you know, we spoke about about a half hour ago, and it was very well received. And it's just so powerful and humbling to hear from folks coming up to me and expressing how much my words impacted them or resonated with them. And, I think it gives me the permission to continue to do more of these. Just confidence, and reassurance that there are people out there that have gone through what I've gone through, from, not seeing themselves represented in leadership to, when you do get a seat at the table, what do? And it makes me really proud to not only represent the company that I work for, but also just represent myself as a bicultural Hispanic Latina in the U.S.
I love that. Oh my God. You introduce yourself perfectly. That's exactly what I think of you. So thank you. I love it. I was so surprised that you said that it was your first panel.
Yeah.
Because you were incredibly eloquent.
Thank you.
And we were talking about it. And Jessica, it is because you're so authentic. Because not only you believe in it, but you've acted on it. And you shared how at the beginning of your, tenure at IKEA, you just didn't feel like you were represented at all levels.
Absolutely.
And how you've changed that with information, with data, and with the conviction that you have, and with the confidence and the assertiveness that you have. That's incredible. And I want you to tell us about it. I just want to point out something. It's interesting because you also represent that part of young leaders that we see in our report, the first report we did with Kantar, which is about being much more assertive and unapologetic, and you don't have to choose. My generation was more about having to integrate. And with integration came a lot of times wanting to hide, right?
Yes.
To hide your language, to hide your origin, to kind of blend in. I love that starting your generation, that's not the truth. Like what's happening right now is what we call the 200 percenters, right? American Latinos that are young feel completely comfortable being 100% American and 100% Latinos. And they don't have to choose. They just feel like whether you like it or not, that's who they are. And they would never have to leave one or the other one. So tell us, to start with, and with that point too, tell us what part of your upbringing pushed you to become a leader in that regard, an activist, but also a successful one.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be raised by strong women. My grandmother, Nilda Santiago, she was one of the most like powerful, strong women that I ever knew. My mother, my aunts, my tias, so I was just always, I'm a Leo. So, naturally just such a leader. And, so I was raised that way. But I will say, when I went into corporate America and I started my journey, my career in marketing, I started in telecommunications, and it was very buttoned up, very, boys club. And to be honest, it was very, much a Caucasian white, organization. And I found myself really shying away from leaning into what my mom and my grandmother always taught me, to be proud of who you are. You're Latina, and that's a superpower. And I don't know why I felt for so long that, let me quiet my voice down, let me tone it down, because I know I have a big energy. And something about that organization made me feel like I had to diminish my light. And I didn't like the way it made me feel. And I was there for 5 years, and I just knew I wanted to go somewhere else, somewhere that I could start over again, be myself. I knew I wanted to work for a brand that aligned with my values and that was doing something in the community. And IKEA was a local brand in Pennsylvania where I was based, and I went for it. And I said to myself, I was going to really be authentically me. And I did. And they welcomed me, and it was an organization that encouraged that. And I will tell you that when I did that, my career started to flourish.
Oh my God, I love that. Tell us more, please.
And not only did my career flourish, I got this sense of confidence, and I knew that, okay, people are resonating with this. My colleagues, my coworkers, and I started in local marketing in the local market of Philadelphia, and folks would say, Jess, you got to get to the corporate office. You got to get a seat at the table. Like, you got to represent us. Because even at IKEA for so long, I didn't see anyone that looked like me, that sounded like me, that came from my background. We had a handful, maybe, if that, of Latino leaders that Hispanic Heritage Month would come around. They were the ones that would always be interviewed, the ones that were always being highlighted. And I'm like, hey, we're here. You have a lot of great, talented Latinos in this organization. And so, I did my best to, really position myself to, move up in the organization. But I always knew when I did that, I was going to do it with intention. And so, I joined our BRGs. I joined the BRG. We have a Hispanic BRG, a business resource group, because it was important for me to show the hundreds of members that are part of that BRG. Our Latino BRG is the biggest one in the company. We have
love
7.
that. Talking about being represented, that's fantastic.
And so I started with, doing segments and just, having conversations and what I would call micro mentorship moments. And, I as I was moving up in my career at IKEA, it was really important for me to bring the rest of the generation up with me, right? Highlighting folks that are doing amazing jobs in the units, that are just unsung heroes, because, they're not in the spotlight. They're not. So, I made it my mission to really spotlight these coworkers, put them on a track of growth, but also identify members in the organization that could be mentors for these individuals. And that's just been really who I am authentically. I have always been a nurturer, empathetic caregiver, and I think it's so important to have the champions in your organization to help lift you up, because I was lucky enough to have a few for me, and I really wanted to pay it forward.
Wow, everything that you're saying. So you're talking about authenticity, about not repressing yourself, about being intentional. You're talking about bringing people with you. You're talking about growing that BRG that you say is now the largest one. And also, it talks so much about who you are, and it also talks about the company, because I am sure, and you don't have to disclose this, but I'm sure a large part of the sales of IKEA comes from the community.
Absolutely.
So the community, so companies that are looking out for the cohort that is making their sales grow are the smartest one. They're the leading brands.
Yeah.
Tell us about it, because you shared in the panel a little bit,
Yeah.
but I want to hear how you correlate this activism with dollars, right?
Absolutely.
This is not a philanthropic effort.
No.
This is the right business decision.
That's right. And that's the narrative that I created in the organization, because IKEA is not new to multicultural marketing. Back in 2018, we had to make some severe budget cuts. And at that point in time, multicultural was taken off of the table. It was one of the things that we had to cut. And I was very upset and disappointed at the time, but I knew that we would come back. And I had to find a way to bring value, right? It was no longer just a nice to do. So, we've been in the country, in the U.S., 40 years now as a home furnishing brand, retail brand, but we still have quite a bit of room to grow when it comes to market share, and the home furnishing retail space is very fragmented. Yeah. And so IKEA really is positioned to grow immensely in the U.S. and really be able to position themselves as the home furnishing brand for the Hispanic and all consumers in the U.S., but particularly the Hispanic consumer.
Right, because it's growing.
Exactly.
It's the fastest growing community.
Exactly. So when our organization was implementing these extensive growth strategies, I said, this is the time. This is the time. Yeah. So, worked on a business plan, positioned it and pitched it to the organization. And it was a no-brainer, because I tied the growth possibilities with this Hispanic audience, not just Hispanic, all multicultural, but primarily the Hispanic audience. That is the first multicultural audience we went out with in our new growth strategy, because we knew that this is where the opportunity was. They're spending over $20 billion in our category. Why would we be not talking to them or being that home furnishing brand for them? So when I started to tie the growth opportunity back to the business, and it was changing the dial, the discussion to, hey, this is a nice thing to do. This is what we should be doing. This is what consumers are looking for. That is true. But we're a retailer, and it needs to make dollars and cents, and it needs to make, a business sense. And so I started to shift the narrative of, hey, this is a growth segment. When we talk about growth opportunity, this is where you're going to see that happen, right? I pulled data, I worked with Kantar, worked with other research companies to really, the first order of business when I got into my role was to get an in-depth research study done, understand what life at home for Hispanics look like, because prior to this, we were talking to a different Hispanic audience. Okay. Back in 2010, 2011, we were talking to the first generation Hispanic. And so I needed the organization to understand this is a much younger, digitally savvy, bicultural Hispanic. We cannot continue the way we were doing things. And so I commissioned a research study where I brought those insights to the organization, and it was mind-blowing with the opportunity that IKEA had to go after this audience. And once I brought that and connected it back to the business, it was a no-brainer. It was like, okay, what do we need to do? Let's build this blueprint. Let's build this, pipeline of roles and let's build the organization. And my really big point with them was, this has to sit outside of just marketing and advertising, because that I knew from my previous experience, it's easy to cut that. You have to build it, and you have to establish it in the organization. It has to be enterprise-wide. When we talk about coworkers, in Miami unit, 75% of our coworkers are Hispanic. And that's just one unit. So how are we ensuring that we are creating a pipeline of succession planning for Hispanic and coworkers? How are we making sure that we're implementing the right hiring practices? I had noted on the panel is when you go into these units, in these stores, you want to see yourself represented. If you need Spanish language support, you want to be able to have that. You want that to be represented. It's important to show your market relevance.
Absolutely.
And so, it went from HR best practices to even a call center. I mean, I had reached out to our call center just to get some initial data to understand how many calls came in last year for Spanish language support. And we had to, work with third-party vendors to help support that. It was a lot because essentially you would have, multiple people on the line. You would have the English-speaking call center coworker, phoning in or patching in a translator. So essentially you have 3 people on a call right now. The customer experience was really taking a hit at that point. So we really needed to elevate and bring that in-house and be able to support our Spanish speaking consumers in the right way and create a frictionless, path to purchase. And with that, then we also launched our Spanish language website, which was a big milestone for the organization. It's something that, they had been wanting to do for several years, but just couldn't get it off the ground. So I led the efforts with that, and we've seen such success there. And, it's been paying dividends. And we see, we talked a little bit today about the shift in purchasing behavior, right? But, Hispanics, scaling back on going to the units. We're seeing increases in our site visitation, and especially in high Hispanic markets like Florida and Texas and New York. We're seeing huge online visitation coming from those specific markets.
Oh my God. Jessica, everything that you just said is the Bible for us. I mean, my team is here and they probably get what you're saying. We talked about a love story of Puerto Rico from Bad Bunny before we started. What you just said is like a love letter for all the efforts that we do, that we are pushing every brand to do.
Yes.
And you have done it, like you instinctively did it because of this passion that you have about knowing where the growth is coming from. Nobody's going to gaslight you to say that Latinos are this and Latinos are that. No, you know who Latinos were, and you knew that this would bring tremendous bottom line for your company.
Absolutely.
And you bet on it,
Yeah.
and your company bet on it, and you did it. That is amazing. I mean, what you're saying is just enlightening because it's exactly what happens to successful brands. And that's why you've made of IKEA a successful brand.
Thank you.
So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I really want to talk to you about how do you envision this? So, as I said before, we've done other reports and we did this incredible report with Kantar last year. And we saw that Latinos were not only, of course, they're driving growth because of demographics, because of college attainment, because upward mobility, because, it is what it is, right? We Latinos are hard workers and our values also focused on, having a nice home and, equipping it with, etc. We saw that Latinos were not only buying a lot, but they were also driving trends.
Yes.
And I wonder if you've seen it. For example, talk back to Bad Bunny, right? Back to, Peso Pluma, back to, Modelo, back to all these things that, consumer products, when they actually bet on it, they pull everybody in. Now we have it with soccer, right? With a World Cup that is coming to the United States and is becoming a big trend. Do you see that with furniture? Do you see that in your research? Do you follow that, and how do you follow it? How Latinos are again driving trends not only in shopping and in purchasing, but also in design, for example, specificity in the kind of furniture they want, in the kind of home products that they want.
Absolutely, and that's why it was so important to understand what life at home looked like for Latinos, right? I mean, we grew up, with our moms, aesthetic, and we're so wildly different from that, right? And it's fascinating because, you have these stereotypes of like, oh, we like color and pattern and this and that. And it's like, it was fascinating to see, actually, we like the modern aesthetic, very clean and very modern looking. And I think it's to really get us to the other side of the spectrum of what we grew up with, like a million pictures on the walls. But
it's a normal reaction, right?
Right? And so I think that, they are like Latinas, because we see that they are the leading force in design and in home purchases and home decisions. They have a very strong aesthetic and a very strong say, and they we are getting our influence from social media, from our influencers, and I think that they are really driving the desire of what home furnishing and home design can look like, right? Modernizing it and just I think really it's just about being a modern Latina in a modern home, and really redefining what that looks like. And so I think that that's the next chapter for me at IKEA is how do we bring some of that into our design aesthetic, and how can we partner with Latinas and Latino designers to help influence our product range here for the U.S.
Absolutely. And I have to say, Jessica, you are the epitome of that. You are the Latina that is driving trends, that is modern, that is, setting an example, that is leading. And so please keep doing the work. We will be in touch with you continuously because we want to follow you. We want to learn from everything that you're doing. And more importantly, I thank you for being that leader, for using your word and for having the power to implement everything that you believe so strongly in.
Thank you, Anna.
So thank you for having
such a
us
pleasure.
and for taking your time. And we'll see Jessica soon.
Yeah, you will.
I'm sure.
Thank you.